Thanks very much. So, can you hear me? Yeah, great. I would like to frame my talk, starting with a very brief survey and then finishing with some myth busting. So let's start with the survey. I would like everyone to put up your hand, please, if you have taught somebody or you know somebody who has been on an EMI program who is from possibly this region, Central and Eastern Europe, but then went on to do an undergrad course, say in the UK, in another European country, or even within the Czech Republic, but doing a course in English. Can you please put your hands up if you know such a person? Okay, okay, all right. Brilliant, thank you, thank you. So, my talk is about, and the context of my talk is looking at secondary school students, basically, school leavers, who are deciding, and we'll see in greater and greater numbers, students who are deciding to go and do their degree course in another country, do their degree course in English, whatever the subject might be, biology, science, social studies, etc. And we'll also see that most of these students are actually going to one specific country, which is the United Kingdom. Now, starting from this context, 2 years ago, Eurexam International, we decided to do a survey amongst secondary school students in this region, which included Czech Republic, Hungary, Ukraine, Serbia, Poland, etc., some countries here, to assess these people's needs, to see how well prepared they thought they were for starting their studies in another country in a foreign language. Having done the survey, we then started a test development process, at the end of which we have come up with a test at level C1, which we call the Eurexam Academic C1, which is a test that was specifically designed for people to demonstrate the skills that they will need in order to be successful during their university studies. And finally, to close the loop, based on the survey and also looking at the tasks of this test, we came up with a third project, or second project, which is undergoing and which aims to develop some teaching materials that teachers in a secondary setting or a language school setting can use to prepare their students both for the test, the Eurexam Academic, and also, in a broader sense, for their studies, whatever the field they're going to study. Now, a little more about the UK context. I'm not sure if you're aware, you most probably are. March this year, the UK government published a new international educational strategy. And according to the strategy, by the year 2030, the UK government is aiming to raise the number of international students by 75%, which is quite substantial. And this strategy seems to be receiving a sort of a positive responses. For example, the president of Universities UK. This seems to be sort of greeted as a welcome change. Now, what about the context in Central Europe? What we can see, and this is 4 of the countries that we have selected: Hungary, the Czech Republic, Poland, and Romania. If we look at numbers over the last 4 years, we can see that they are steadily growing. They have been steadily growing. And so 2014-15, we had just below 15,000 students going to the UK. And last year, we had over 21,000 So again, a similar sort of increase, 70% increase over the course of 4 years, students going to study in the UK only from this region. Of course, we can see that the most populous countries, Poland and Romania, will have, of course, higher numbers. Now, just a few words about the context in the sense who we are, the exam board, Eurexam International. We were established in the year 2000. We like to boast about us being the first exam board that had tests originally developed and based on the then newly published CFR, the CFR scales. And this is what we are actually still offering. Maybe, slightly different from other exam boards like Cambridge or the IELTS test, which is on a scale. We have level tests, so the exam level C1, for example, B2, B1, etc. We offer tests in 2 languages, English and German, and if I'm not sure how visible the little yellow dots are, our exam centers are mostly in Europe, also Russia, and a few centers across in America as well. Now, even more importantly, our population testing population profile. What we can see is that 3/4 of our testing population are aged between 16 and 22. So that means that most of these people are actually at an age where they will be going from secondary school into higher education. And it's actually 12,000 candidates each year that are taking test at B2C1. So typically levels that will be required by a university. All our tests, as I say, are aligned with the CFR. So on the left-hand side, just next to the CFR scales, you can see our tests. And then on the right-hand side, we have the scales of some other major exams, such as IELTS, TOEFL, and Trinity. We are directly linked to the CFR, and IELTS is also linked to the CFR. So we are not actually claiming that we are directly linked to IELTS scores, but certainly indirectly, in the sense that all of these tests and all of these exam boards have done research to link themselves and their scales to specific CFR levels. Now, moving on to the first stage of our project that I had mentioned, the survey 2 years ago. This is something that we did 2 years ago. Our rationale was, in offering it and doing it, was to look at applicants' motivations. People going into higher education, EMI programs, what are their motivations? What are their perceived strengths and possible challenges? What differences can we see between students who are just about to begin their studies in the UK and others who have already completed a year there? Can we see any differences in their perceptions of these issues? And what about their teachers? How do they assess their students' strengths and challenges? So, here's a bit of basic information about the survey. We supplied our survey to 3 different groups. The 2 groups of students and the teachers. We had a total number of almost 500 respondents, and as you can see, mostly countries in the Central and Eastern European countries, and we had 29 receiving universities at the UK end. The main survey sections were looking for people's responses on, again, motivations, why they were wanting to do their course in the UK, their own self-assessment of preparedness, and also how they felt about their academic and language skills in terms of beginning their studies. So motivation. One of the questions that we asked was, what are or were the two most important factors that have affected your decision to study in the UK? Now, what we can see here is that whether it was people already in the UK or people still going to the UK, the two most important issues that they mentioned that really stand out were the quality of education at UK universities and the fact that I, as a student, will hold a valuable degree. And these were, we can see that these were absolutely the most important. And there's even a slight shift. People who were already in the UK felt even more strongly about this, but the same response. Now, another question, what are or were the two most important factors that have affected your choice of university, the specific university? Again, two things stand out. One being the right course content and structure, and the other one being the universities, the specific universities or the courses ranking in the UK. Again, the two stand out, but interesting to observe that for people who were still headed to the UK, the right course content was number one. Now, for people who were already at the university course ranking was the top priority. So it's just interesting to observe this shift. You're about to go, you're excited about what you're going to study, the actual course. When you're already in the course, even if, these people were just at the end of their first year, but they were already possibly thinking about work, employment, and in this sense, the ranking of the course might have been important or even slightly more important to them. Okay, so far so good, but how confident are these people when they are entering a UK university, or rather before they enter a UK university? These are figures for students who haven't yet started their course. And on the left-hand side, we can see different, components and different academic skills that we asked them to reflect on. And when we look at the left-hand side, where people are saying that they were feeling a little or very unprepared, we can see that relatively high numbers for, say, academic essay writing, 27% altogether, 32% for a feeling of unpreparedness, or presentation skills, 24% altogether, debating skills, again 24%. So relatively high figures. And what we can see is that the bottom line, subject knowledge, they felt relatively, or rather, I should say, confident that the actual subject knowledge was good enough. So taking our whole survey and all the questions, this was just a selection of the questions that we asked, what we have found was that an overwhelming majority of people felt that their subject knowledge was okay, their knowledge of whatever, biology, history, sociology, whatever they were going to study, they were quite confident about that, but not about academic skills, writing, debating, research skills, etc. So clearly, they seem to need help there. They need help. Where do they get it? So how and what help is or was available to you? Again, in both groups, what we can see is that most people prepare on their own. They are basically, to some extent, left to their own devices. They still, attend extra language courses. Friends help them, but it's mostly, working on your own. And finally, what do the teachers think? What does the external person think about all this. And again, we see a reflection of what student self-assessment was. Again, at the very bottom of this table, we see that teachers also think that their students' subject knowledge is good enough. 71%, they are very well prepared in terms of their subject knowledge. But the rest of the lines, the rows, the academic skills for essay writing, somewhat prepared. Presentation skills, 46%, again, somewhat prepared. So the teachers themselves failed. And these teachers were all EFL teachers who might actually also teach subjects, other content subjects. These were their feelings about their students. So there we were, and we felt that we had an issue to address. And then we looked at our own Central Eastern European tradition and how education works. We looked at our own university studies and our own school studies, and we realized that maybe there's something quite fundamental that we're possibly not doing right. When I think back to my school years, I remember that it was always about the content. So whenever teacher thinks about upcoming semester or academic year, it's starting with the content. This is the book that I'm going to teach. This is the book that I'm going to teach to my students. And then they teach the book. And then I got a test on the book at the end of the whatever semester or school year, and that test was about the material that the teacher thought was appropriate, and that was basically the end of the story. And we wanted to look at it, start from the other end, and first think about what we actually thought was important for the students to achieve in terms of knowledge, in terms of skills. So we started with some learning outcomes, what we wanted them to achieve, and then, this was before we started the test development process, then we looked at what sort of test questions we can use to help these people to demonstrate this knowledge and these skills, and eventually we came up with the material, sort of the book. We didn't start the book, we ended the process with the book. So this is just a list of the outcomes in terms of reading. So, complex written text, educational context, once again, students going into higher education, understanding finer shades of meaning, effective strategies to approach written texts. This is all things that will be required at level C1, which is, I reckon, the level that is necessary in order to function efficiently and effectively in higher education. For listening, again, university lecture, following a complex line of arguments, making effective notes. These will be important in your university years. Writing, all the components of producing a good essay, speaking, delivering a well-structured presentation, initiating and maintaining a balanced discussion on a topic. All of these we felt were really important in the context. So, next step, looking at the test itself, clearly the thematic composition had to be somehow linked to people's future studies, but of course this is not a subject-specific test. This is a generic academic test, so you will have tasks which have a mixture of different fields. But these were the three main fields that we identified, and all our tasks will be thematically linked to one of them. In terms of communication contexts, these were the communication contexts, again, that we identified that would be common to all fields. again, whether it's medicine or sociology. You will be giving a presentation, you will be listening to some lectures, whatever your subject is. Also, you will be having a sort of a meeting about a conference poster. You will be emailing your tutor, irrespective of what course you've taken. So these were the fundamentals of our new test. And just to give you a glimpse of each of the 4 papers, this test has 4 papers. So it's all, the 4 main communication skills. There is no separate use of English paper. For reading, for example, which is a 50-minute paper, we will have, here is just one example, an academic task where you have complex text with some chunks taken out, and in order to be able to reinsert these chunks, you will be looking at issues like topic sentence, paragraph closing, anaphoric, cataphoric references, developing an idea, etc. So text structure. Looking at listening, which is a 40-minute paper, the task that I selected here is about lecture notes. It's actually what the task is called, lecture notes. So you will, this example here is about Indian politics, the time of Nehru, etc. And people will listen to the lecture, and on the right-hand side, you can see the answer sheet. And the answer sheet will have some headings, the main points of the lecture, and it will have some questions that kind of guide you through the main points of the lecture. So as you are looking at your answer sheet and responding to these questions, you will basically be making notes of the main points of what you have heard, which is, certainly not an exact replica of what you'll be required to do in a real university setting, but maybe a step closer than some other non-academic listening tasks. In writing, we have 2 tasks in 60 minutes. The second task on the right-hand side is your typical academic test task, where you have a choice of 3 topics, and you can pick any of the 3 topics and write a discussion essay. Again, the 3 topics will be linked to those 3 major areas of knowledge: humanities, sciences, business studies. So irrespective, again, of what course you want to do, you will have a topic that is kind of relevant to you. Task 1, which is in the middle, is sort of quite different. Not many academic tests that I know of do this. We have a transactional email, which will be, fulfilling the communication, sort of communication aims, which are not directly linked to your studies, but rather indirectly. So you'll be writing an email to your tutor about your semester marks or your essay results, your tutor's feedback, and requesting an appointment because you would like to discuss this. And I don't know if any one of you has ever or is at the moment working with university students, especially university students who don't speak the language of whatever course you're doing. But very often I receive emails where there is nothing like, dear, whatever. It's maybe possibly, hey, sir, or just hey, or nothing. And just the content in terrible spelling, and there's no sign off, whatever. So why not actually, help people with this as well? And finally, speaking. The speaking test is a paired test. So 2 candidates are taking the speaking test together, and they will be presenting on a topic. And here is a few examples of what they can be asked to deliver a presentation on. Before the actual speaking test, the candidate will have 10 minutes preparation time to look at the topics, to think about the topics, and then go into the exam room and deliver a 2-minute presentation. And during the presentation, the other candidate will be just listening and making notes, and then initiating a discussion of about 2.5 minutes where they discuss the topic. The other candidate has a chance to agree, disagree, ask questions, engage in a sort of a maybe more in-depth discussion of the topic, and then they switch roles. So that's our speaking, which again is trying to do something that kind of resembles scenarios that you might have in a university context. Great. So we had the test, but we also knew from the survey that our students felt quite unprepared for their studies, and we also thought that if they felt unprepared for their studies in a UK university, they also felt possibly unprepared for our test as an extension of that. So we started developing a series of teaching modules, altogether 20 teaching hours for each of the 4 modules that focus on the 4 communication skills. And these are the main structural chapters of each of these modules. We'll have more generic academic skills focus, and eventually at the very end, more specific test focus. And as in the final part of my talk, I'd just like to give you a sort of a hint about what a module like this looks like, and using the speaking module. Here is the structure, and now we will be looking at the introduction part. We'll look at structure, we'll look at body language, and we'll look at the presentation practice part of this module. So, in introduction, we will have people look at something, something that has a very sort of British flavor to it. We certainly don't have this sort of thing in this part of the world. Speaker's Corner. So what's Speaker's Corner? Code of conduct. Speaker's Corner in the town of Lichfield. They look at the code of conduct. They look at the sort of set of rules that you observe when you speak publicly. And they look at these rules and pick the 2 odd ones out. Okay, so for example, one of the odd ones out is the last one: stop speaking when they engage an audience of fewer than 5 people. So yeah, you are still okay if there's 4 people. So that's an introduction. And then we also look at different types of public speech. We look at a business presentation, we look at a university lecture, we look at stand-up comedy, etc. And then the student will start thinking about these different genres, levels of formality, the awareness of the audience, what is the aim of the speaker, rhetorical devices that the speaker uses. So this will, a way of starting to focus on our eventual aim, which will be the presentation in a university context. Now, of course, we will cover, basic ground. What is the actual sort of formal structure of a university presentation? They'll be looking at those structural elements, and we will, call their attention to the fact, as Mark Twain says, it usually takes more than 3 weeks to prepare an impromptu speech. How important it is, you might think that, you just stand up and talk, but you might actually want to prepare even when you want to look like somebody who is delivering an impromptu speech. Apart from the actual content, we'll also look at body language. We will have students look at videos where experts talk about this issue, the do's and don'ts of what you do, how you use your hands, how you look at your audience, what you should do and what you shouldn't do when you're delivering a presentation. And then finally, we'll arrive at presentation practice. And this is something that we did in a secondary school in Budapest, Városmari Gymnasium, you might have heard, it's a very famous secondary school. Anyway, we did this with some students there, some piloting, and what we do is, as part of this, the students will deliver their mini presentations and then receive feedback on it. In fact, we'll have sort of 360-degree feedback in the sense that they'll be given feedback by their teacher, they'll be given feedback by their peers, the other students, and they will also be asked to self-reflect on their presentation, and based on checklists like this. So, for example, this is one example, a peer feedback checklist that the other students will be filling out, but the teacher will have one of these. You will have one of these as the speaker, and this will help you think about the strengths and areas where you want to still develop. So this is what she did.
So the thesis I have chosen is developing public transport is a better way of reducing urban congestion than introducing self-driving cars. I can completely agree with the thesis. Urban congestion is mainly caused by the number of cars and not the ability of the drivers and their skills. But by developing public transport, it is, for instance, if developing underground or subways, it can reduce the traffic on the surface.
Okay. Maybe enough as a demonstration. Now, the same girl was then asked to think about her own performance. Maybe some good things about her, maybe some things that she can still develop. So once again, she received feedback from the teacher, from the other students, and also reflected on her own performance. And this was her own self-reflection checklist, and this is what she said.
So, Mira, how about your opinion of your video, your presentation of video?
I think all in all I could get my message to the audience, but the way I presented wasn't really good. I could have structured it better, and I could have organized the details better. Stronger introduction and a stronger conclusion would have been necessary, I think.
Okay, your body language, your presence?
I think it wasn't extremely good, it was nothing special.
Okay, your tone of voice, your, I don't know, the way you spoke, was it okay?
I think the tone of voice was okay.
So.
Right, okay. So that's sort of closing the loop in terms of the speaking module, where once again people have several rounds of practice and self-reflection and feedback that will help them get better and better in this particular field. Now, as I say, these mini modules are still under development, and we're hoping to release them, publish them for teachers to use at the end of this year, November 2019. You might think, okay, but why? There's loads of material available that will help students with academic skills. And our response, we have actually two responses to that. Yes, that's true, but I think it's also true that much of the academic skills-focused material is really academic writing focused, and slightly less is about listening skills, speaking skills, reading skills. So maybe it will be useful in that sense. And it's also going to be useful in the sense that we will be actually specifically helping secondary school teachers in this region where the materials might not be available, or where it also might be a financial issue of what they can use in a school and what not. So finally, just to close, Central European students going to the UK, in the survey we have identified a challenge in the sense that people need more practice in terms of academic skills. We have developed a test that will help these people demonstrate the very academic skills that they will need in their UK or other EMI programs on their university studies. And finally, the material that will help them achieve that goal. So that's the closing of my presentation, and at the very beginning I promised you a bit of myth busting. That's quite interesting. Last week I was at another conference, at the EALTA conference in Dublin, where I had a chance to talk to two dozen people who are in UK higher education, language centres, academic skills tutors. And I talked to them, I wasn't actually presenting, but I talked to them about our new test, the Exam Academic, and I said, all right, okay, but why did you do this? I mean, there is another test, I don't even have to mention the name of this test, that all students need to take if they want to study in the UK. There's just one test that they need to take. And I said, no, sorry, that's a myth. It's not true. It's not true. Basically, and that's quite recent, now you can take any test, and it's totally up to the university which test is accepted. So hopefully your exam academic will eventually fulfill its purpose. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kristof. That was great. A little bit of housekeeping.